I know lawyers do not study the Constitution in law school. But when I heard what supposed constitutional scholar Alan Dershowitz said regarding state powers, well, all I could think of is that it gave all true scholars a bad name. So we'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study. And fair warning, you're going to need your duct tape for this one.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. Yes, the actual Constitution. We teach the rising generation to be free, and I am so glad you could join me. I'm going to try and keep it together, but this particular story really raises my blood pressure. I wanted to invite all of you to head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You can find all the text, the quotes I transcribed, everything related to this particular article, and all the other articles that I do. You can find out what's going on, where I'll be speaking, what events I'll be doing. You can ask questions. You can purchase some of our products. You can support what we're doing. All of this is possible at the Constitution Study. That is the best place to get started. I also want to thank everybody that helps put this on, that helps make this happen, that provides me with material, with questions. It really is wonderful to see this many people engaged, and I'm glad to hear it. But now, get ready with your duct tape. It's time to deal with Mr. Dershowitz. Now, after hearing and reading some of his quotes, I was able to track down the interview on the Crowdsource The Truth Facebook page. Now, I wanted to watch it firsthand to make sure that Mr. Dershowitz wasn't being misquoted or quoted out of context. And I'm glad I did for a couple of reasons. Yes, I wanted to give Mr. Dershowitz a fair hearing. And yes, a lot of what he said is ethically and constitutionally sound. My problems begin, though, around 20 minutes into the video. So let's take a look at some of Mr. Dershowitz's quotes that, well, raise the most ires with constitutionally literate Americans. Quote, "You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread the disease, even if you disagree." This statement is true, but it avoids a very basic fact. You see, the Fourth Amendment requires the government to show in court probable cause that you are a danger to the public. And the Fifth and 14th Amendments prohibit the government from depriving you of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, one of the most basic concepts of our legal system is that of due process, a fair legal process where the rights of all are protected. Part of that is the assumption that people are innocent until proven guilty. Yet what Mr. Dershowitz is proposing, and which he will further flesh out in the interview, is an assumption that everyone is a carrier, a typhoid Mary, spreading the disease to everyone they encounter. Now, there's also another basic assumption made by this and similar arguments, that the only person responsible for their actions are the ones who wish to go outside. Mr. Dershowitz and thousands of others I've seen on the social media forget that for someone to spread the virus, they must encounter someone who does not already have it. Now, if a person doesn't want to take the chance of getting the virus, it is incumbent on them to stay out of the public, not to get the government to force others to stay at home. Quote, "You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business." Now, these statements are not only wrong, they're absurd. The Fourth Amendment says, quote, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated." Now, our right to be secure in our person against unreasonable searches shall not be violated. Guess what, Mr. Dershowitz? You have not been granted the authority to determine what is reasonable. The people created the governments, we established their boundaries, and we determine what is and is not reasonable. Period. That goes for vaccinations, the wearing of masks, and the opening of our property, businesses or otherwise. Furthermore, the Fifth Amendment says, quote, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." And the 14th Amendment says, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of a citizen of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." Furthermore, Mr. Dershowitz, both the 5th and 14th Amendments prohibit governments from depriving someone of their life, their liberty, or their property without that famous due process. That includes the liberty to go outside, to travel, and do what they want up to and until there is reasonable cause that they are a danger to others. That also means the government is prohibited from depriving you of your property, including the property of your business, without showing in a court a reasonable cause that you individually are a danger to others. Quote, if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. This one about made me blow up. See, I have a hard time putting into words just how disturbing this statement is, especially from someone of Jewish heritage. Nowhere is the government given the authority to make medical decisions for you. Nowhere is the government given the power to assault you for not taking their advice. In fact, should anyone in government follow Mr. Dershowitz's recommendation, they would be in violation of federal law, punishable by a fine and up to 10 years in prison. From Title 18 U.S. Code 242, quote, whoever under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, willingly subjects any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. And if bodily injury results from the acts committed in violation of this section, or if such acts include the use, attempted use, threatened use of a dangerous weapon, explosives, or fire, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. To have anything, quote, plunged into your arm is bodily injury. And if complications should arise from this forced vaccination, the government employees who did this could spend life in prison. Back to Section 242. And if death results from the acts committed in violation of this section, or if such acts include kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to kill, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for any term of years or for life, or both, or may be sentenced to death. If this happened to me, I would push for life in prison under the kidnapping clause of this statute. Ask yourself, is the assault, kidnapping, and forced medical treatments by any government really that different than what Joseph Mengele did to the Jews in Auschwitz? Quote, you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police powers of the Constitution, gives the state the power to compel that, and there are cases in the United States Supreme Court. First of all, Mr. Dershowitz has the entire power structure our founding fathers created backwards. See, we do not derive our rights and powers from the government. They derive their powers from us. There is no police power in the Constitution. There is not a public health clause in the Constitution. Mr. Dershowitz is probably parroting the nonsense that is taught in law schools and courts across the nation, that anything not prohibited to the government by the Constitution is a power they can exercise, a fallacy we'll delve into shortly. Quote, that's what a democracy is about. And if the majority of the people agree and support that for public health measures you have to be vaccinated, you have to be vaccinated. Mr. Dershowitz is quite correct. In a democracy, your rights are subject to the will of the majority. There's just one little problem. We don't live in a democracy. And for this very reason, from Thomas Jefferson, quote, a democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. Or as James Madison wrote, hence, it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. The very reason we have a constitution is to secure the blessings of liberty. We are a republic, specifically so that our rights will supersede the will of the majority, so that a vote cannot deprive you of life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, or any other right. Yet Mr. Dershowitz seems more than happy to throw the entire idea of rights and liberty out the window because of a virus. Quote, democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. It seems Mr. Dershowitz is more than happy to live in a democracy, as long as he is a wolf. I wonder how he would feel if he was the lamb. Quote, they should give you an alternative. The alternative is to live in your home, don't get vaccinated, but never ever leave your home or live in a bubble. But if you want to interact with other people, you cannot become Typhoid Mary. So Mr. Dershowitz wants you locked up if you disagree with the government. But wait, there's more on that to come. Now, for a Constitution 101 class from Mr. Dershowitz. The Constitution doesn't give you the right to spread your illness to other people. Lesson number 1 from Mr. Dershowitz. The Constitution doesn't give anyone unalienable rights. Your right to be secure in your person is protected by the Constitution. It does not come from it. And lesson number 2. You are innocent until proven guilty in America. At least you used to be. If there is probable cause that someone may spread the virus, then the government can detain them, and only then. There is now no power delegated by the Constitution to the government to arbitrarily intern you, perform medical experiments on you, or submit you to the will of some government employee that is outside of the specific enumerated powers given. Quote, what you can't do is say, I don't agree with Fauci, therefore I'm going to take the law into my own hands and spread the disease. Lesson number 3. Mr. Fauci has not been elected by the people to establish law. He's an advisor to the president. But that does not give him the authority to dictate to the American people how to live their lives. It is not the people who disagree with Mr. Fauci who are taking the law in their own hands. It is people like Mr. Dershowitz who are blatantly and flagrantly usurping the power of the people over their government. It is Mr. Dershowitz and others like him who are spreading the disease of tyranny and despotism across this nation. Quote, if the decision is made by the government. Well, lesson number 4, Mr. Dershowitz, in a constitutional republic, the government does not get to decide what it can and cannot do. It can only do what has been delegated by the people through the Constitution that formed it. What Mr. Dershowitz is describing is not a democracy, but a despotic oligarchy. A system where if you can rise to the aristocracy of office, you can do whatever you please as long as you can get enough people to agree with you. Mr. Dershowitz then gives an example. Quote, doctor says to you, unless you cut off your leg, you'll die. You have a right to die. You don't have to cut off your leg. But if the doctor says, unless you cut off your leg, your leg is contagious and will spread your disease to many, many, many other people, that's a completely different issue constitutionally. All right, well, this is a completely salacious and foolish argument. Mr. Dershowitz is comparing apples to oranges. If a doctor has evidence that you are contagious, then yes, the government has probable cause to restrict your movements. That does not give them the authority to mandate medical treatment. But what Mr. Dershowitz wants to do is to bypass the doctor's diagnosis, the prognosis, even the examination process, and to use his example, cut off everyone's leg because of a disease that some people have and even fewer people die from. And the fact that he claims the Constitution gives government the authority to do this proves he has been educated into imbecility when it comes to constitutional issues. Quote, if a safe vaccine is developed for COVID-19, I hope it's mandated, and I will defend it, and I will argue that in the Supreme Court of the United States against your views. Safe for whom, Mr. Dershowitz? There is no such thing as a totally safe vaccine. The American people, they're not all the same. There are people who get sick and die from vaccines every year. There are others who are seriously injured by the complications from those vaccines. Remember, vaccines are made by taking a weakened version of the disease so your body can develop antibodies to fight it without being overwhelmed. Yet what did Mr. Dershowitz say earlier in this interview? Quote, you have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread the disease even if you disagree? Yet what does he claim the authority to do here? to endanger an unknown percentage of the public by spreading a disease because he disagrees with not being vaccinated. He is literally claiming the right to do what he claims you do not, simply because he disagrees with you. Now, when he was asked if he would get a vaccination if it was available tomorrow, Mr. Dershowitz said, quote, "I would be the first one in line. My children would get it. Everybody would get it if we felt it was safe. We'd obviously make our own judgment. If decided to, garbled a bit, civil disobedience and violate the law, that would be a different thing, but the law would be completely valid." So let me get this straight, Mr. Dershowitz. If you don't think the vaccine is safe, and you decide on a course of quote-unquote civil disobedience, well, that's one thing. But if anyone else doesn't think the vaccine is safe, they're to be rounded up, dragged into a doctor's office, and according to you, forcibly injected. This is what you just said, isn't it? Now, what really bothers me is I ask how many people who don't know any better are listening to this nonsense from Mr. Dershowitz and others like him. How many people who have not taken the time to think through what he is saying are following along like the good little serfs Mr. Dershowitz thinks we are? Now, sure, you may think that something on the order of Dr. Mengele wouldn't happen in America. But I remind you that thousands of American citizens were interned simply because of their Japanese heritage. And one case, Karamatsu versus United States, well, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that Supreme Court, which Mr. Dershowitz put so much faith in, found that it was perfectly legal to arrest a man for violating an illegal executive order to deprive him of his life and liberty and property without due process of law. Do you really want to entrust the protection of your rights to a government and a court like that? Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to stop Mr. Dershowitz from speaking his mind. I want every American to see just how irrational, illogical, ignorant, and intolerant these ideas are. I want everyone to feel sorry that after such a long and storied career, Mr. Dershowitz is showing his ignorance of a topic that he's supposed to be an expert in. I want Americans everywhere to realize that just because someone is a lawyer or claims to be a constitutional scholar, well, it doesn't mean they have any clue what the supreme law of the land actually says. Mr. Dershowitz has been indoctrinated by a legal and educational system that has long abandoned even the pretense of studying the Constitution or viewing it as the supreme law of the land. People like Mr. Dershowitz and others who think like them, well, they should be pitied and then ignored. And when Mr. Dershowitz claims the government has the authority to intern you, assault you, and inject you, remind him of the words that said that those laws don't apply to him and his family. And when someone from the government comes to force you to comply, hand them a copy of the Constitution, or at least some of the more pertinent parts of it, and I'll put a link in the description, and remind them they swore an oath to support the Constitution. And then remind them of the reason we have a Second Amendment is to keep us and our states free from tyrants that think they can ignore the supreme law of the land and do whatever they want, whatever they think is right. It has happened before in America. I pray it doesn't have to happen again. So, did that make your head explode as bad as it did mine? Did that just infuriate you? This has raised my blood pressure several times. I even had a hard time writing this because of how aggravating it was. Mr. Dershowitz has a position of power, he has a storied career, and he has the ear of several powerful people in this country, and he's speaking absolute nonsense. I don't like calling people names, but I'm sorry, the stuff that's coming out of this mouth is ridiculous. It's childish. It's stupid. It's imbecilic. I can't believe that an educated person, someone who has spent a lifetime practicing law, knows so little about the supreme law of the land. I'm not surprised because of the state America is in, but it still drives me nuts. That's why you and me and every American needs to read and study our Constitution. So when people like Mr. Dershowitz show up and say, you have no right to your life, liberty, and property, we can show them where they're wrong. And when the people in government listen to this nonsense and come after us, we understand we have the process to stand up, to defend and assert our rights and say no. And hopefully we'll have the courage to stand together when they show up. I debate about whether to use the line about Joseph Mengele, but this is very close to what Mengele was doing. The idea that we're going to experiment on the American people because somebody said the drug is safe, and we're going to mandate it, and in Mr. Dershowitz's case, use force to implement it, should get the hackles up of every freedom-loving American. This should be an outrage. This man should be virtually pilloried in public for his tyrannical, despotic views. And anyone who tries to implement them should be summarily dismissed as unqualified to hold office, to hold any position of trust. This is your life, people. Your rights, your life, your liberty, and that of your children. And you're going to let the government tell you what you have to put in your arm? And you're going to let people from the government come and force you? I don't want this to become a fight on the battlefield, but we sure need to fight this at the ballot box. And it needs to happen this year and next year and the year after that, because tyrants cannot be allowed in an America if we're still going to be the land of the free. The decision is ours, people. Are we going to be serfs? Are we going to be led by tyrants? Or are we going to choose people who will protect our rights, who will defend the Constitution, who will support their oath of office? Because the decision is ours. And if the COVID-19 has shown us anything, it's shown us just how close to a tin-pot petty dictatorship America truly is. The question is, as we run off this cliff to tyranny and despotism, will we wake up? Will we stand up? Will we slam on the brakes and go, no? Or will we follow these petty, tin-pot dictator leaders over the cliff into the abyss of tyranny and servanthood? The decision is yours, people. All of these people that actually make the decisions work for us. Are we going to hire better agents? Or are we going to roll over and be the good little serfs Mr. Dershowitz thinks that we are? Take this word, spread this word, show everybody what this man wants on their horizon, what this man wants for your future. Recognize the influence this man has and show it. Shout it from the rooftop, spread it through social media. We need the people to recognize, just how serious this is and just what is in store for us if we don't stop them. And if we do shout it from the rooftops, if we do get enough of the American people to stand up and go, oh no, then hopefully you'll be around the next time for the Constitution study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from